Anika clutched the golden ticket in her trembling hands, her breath catching as she stepped onto the cruise ship's gleaming marble deck. For years, she'd dreamed of escaping her struggles, but she had no idea that one magical night aboard would change her life forever and reveal secrets she couldn't have imagined. Welcome to the Elite Chronicles YouTube channel. Before we dive deeper into Anika's incredible journey, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Your stories inspire us, and who knows, you might see yours featured here next. Also, do not forget to subscribe for more life-changing stories like this one. Now, let's continue. Anika stared out the window of the cramped apartment she called home, her hands trembling as she held the golden ticket that had just arrived in the mail. It was almost too good to be true, a free pass to a luxury cruise, the kind of getaway she could only dream about. For years, she'd been stuck in the same relentless cycle, juggling two dead-end jobs, trying to make ends meet, and feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. But this was her escape. The brochure promised paradise, crystal-clear waters, gourmet dinners, and nights filled with music and laughter. She could already imagine herself sipping cocktails under the stars, far from the relentless grind that defined her days. It was a chance to leave behind the mounting bills, the landlord's stern warnings, and the aching loneliness that had become her constant companion. Anika packed her suitcase with care, folding her only evening dress and a pair of worn heels she'd bought years ago for a cousin's wedding. She wasn't sure she'd fit in with the wealthy crowd on board, but for once, she decided she didn't care. This was her moment, a fleeting glimpse of a life she never thought she'd touch. As she stepped aboard the ship, the sheer grandeur of it took her breath away. Glistening marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and a staff dressed in crisp uniforms greeted her like royalty. She felt small and out of place, but also alive, like a part of her had been waiting for this very moment. And just as she began to relax, soaking in the beauty of the horizon, the cruise staff handed her an invitation to a Caribbean-themed party that evening. It was the kind of event she'd only seen in movies. Anika's heart raced. Could this be the beginning of something magical? The Caribbean-themed party was everything Anika had imagined, and more. The ship's grand ballroom was transformed into an island paradise, complete with swaying palm trees, vibrant flower arrangements, and the faint sound of steel drums playing in the background. The air smelled of tropical fruits and ocean mist, and the soft glow of lanterns lit the room with a warm, golden hue. Anika hesitated at the entrance, nervously tugging at the hem of her dress. It wasn't as flashy or new as what the other guests were wearing, but she hoped the soft blue fabric and her careful touch of makeup would be enough to help her blend in. She adjusted her heels, straightened her back, and stepped inside. The room buzzed with laughter and chatter, a world so different from the one Anika knew. Waiters carrying trays of sparkling champagne weaved through groups of elegantly dressed people, their conversations light and carefree. For a moment, Anika felt like an outsider, standing on the edges of this extravagant world. Then she saw him. He stood by the bar, his presence commanding without trying. Dark-haired, tall, and impeccably dressed, he had an effortless charm that seemed to draw people toward him. Yet there was something about his demeanor, an air of quiet mystery, as if he didn't quite belong there either. Anika tried to look away, but his piercing eyes caught hers. Foxier a moment, time seemed to stop. A small smile played on his lips, and before she could think, he was walking toward her. "You look like you could use one of these," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. His voice was smooth, with a hint of playfulness that instantly put her at ease. "Thanks," she replied, her cheeks flushing as she took the glass. "I'm Bob," he said, extending his hand. "Anika," she replied, shaking his hand, surprised by the warmth in his touch. "What brings you aboard this floating paradise, Anika?" She hesitated, unsure how much of her real life she wanted to share with this stranger. "Just needed a break from the usual," she said finally. "What about you?" Bob chuckled softly, his eyes glinting with amusement. You could say the same, escaping the usual. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in what felt like years, Anika let her guard down. They talked about everything and nothing. Favorite books, places they wanted to visit, even their shared love for sunsets over the ocean. He was charming, but not overbearing, curious, but not intrusive. As they danced, she noticed a flicker of something behind his charming smile, an almost imperceptible sadness, like a man carrying a secret too heavy to share. As the night wore on, Bob led her to the dance floor. The music slowed and they moved together under the soft glow of the lanterns. Anika couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this alive, this scene. I think I'm going to remember this night for a long time, she said softly, looking up at him. Bob smiled, but there was something wistful in his expression. Me too, he replied, but sometimes things are better left as memories. Before she could ask what he meant, the music changed and the spell was broken. Bob stepped back, his hand lingering on hers for a moment longer than necessary. I should go, he said abruptly. Wait, Anika called after him, but he was already gone, disappearing into the crowd as if he had never been there. The days after the party felt strangely hollow for Anika. She searched for Bob everywhere, on the sun-drenched decks, in the elegant dining rooms, even by the piano bar where they had laughed over shared stories. But it was as if he had vanished into thin air. At first, she thought maybe she had misread him. Perhaps she was just another fleeting moment in his otherwise glamorous life, a passing distraction he wouldn't bother to remember. But something about the way he had looked at her, the quiet intensity in his eyes, made her doubt that. She tried asking the staff about him, but they gave her polite smiles and non-committal answers. It was clear that the people aboard this ship valued discretion, and Bob seemed to know how to keep himself invisible. Her final night on the cruise was bittersweet. She stood on the deck, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The beauty of it should have filled her with peace, but instead her mind was racing with unanswered questions. Who was Bob, really? Why had he left so suddenly? And why couldn't she shake the feeling that their encounter meant something more? When the ship docked the next morning, Anika disembarked with a heavy heart. She told herself it was just a brief connection, a magical moment that had passed like the waves beneath the ship. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. Months passed, and life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm of struggle and survival. The cruise felt like a distant dream, a glittering memory that didn't quite belong in the reality of overdue rent and endless shifts at the diner. But then, one morning, Anika woke up feeling different. Anika stared at the test in her shaking hands, the 2 pink lines glaring back at her like a judgment she wasn't ready to face. Her knees buckled, and she slid to the bathroom floor, clutching the test as her thoughts spiraled. She felt a cocktail of emotions, panic, disbelief, and a strange flicker of hope she didn't fully understand. Could this really be happening? For a moment, her mind flashed back to that night on the cruise, the way he had looked at her, the way he had held her as they danced under the stars. Tears pricked her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. This wasn't the life she had planned, and yet here she was, carrying a part of it, of him. But then, the shock turned into something else, a quiet, fierce resolve. She placed her hand on her belly, whispering, "We're in this together." Anika's emotions swung wildly between fear and excitement. The thought of 3 tiny lives growing inside her filled her with a sense of awe and purpose. But the question loomed over her like a storm cloud. Who was the father? She knew it was Bob. There was no doubt in her mind. But how could she find him? She had no last name, no contact information, no way of reaching him. The more she thought about it, the more it seemed impossible. Until one night, while scrolling aimlessly through her phone, she stumbled upon an article that made her heart stop. The headline read, "Elusive billionaire behind world's most luxurious cruise line unveiled." There he was, Bob, or rather Robert W. Langston, the owner of the cruise ship she had sailed on. The article described him as a reclusive billionaire with a keen eye for luxury and an aversion to the spotlight. Anika's hands shook as she read about his sprawling empire, his philanthropic efforts, and his reputation for guarding his personal life fiercely. She couldn't believe it. The charming, mysterious man who had danced with her under the moonlight was one of the wealthiest men in the world. For a moment, she considered walking away. What could she possibly say to someone like him? But then she thought of the tiny lives growing inside her, their futures uncertain. She couldn't let fear hold her back. Anika made a decision that night. She would find Robert, and tell him the truth. Not because she wanted his money or his pity, but because her children deserved to know their father. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation and anxiety. Anika knew she was stepping into a world far removed from her own, a world of wealth, power, and influence. She researched everything she could about Robert Langston, his business empire, his known associates, even the charities he supported. But the more she learned, the more intimidated she felt. Her first attempt to reach him was through the cruise line's customer service. She called, her voice trembling as she explained that she needed to contact Robert Langston regarding a personal matter. The response was curt. "Mr. Langston does not handle customer inquiries. Please direct your concerns to our general office." Undeterred, Anika wrote a detailed letter, carefully explaining her situation without sounding desperate or accusatory. She mailed it to the corporate headquarters, hoping it would somehow reach him. Weeks passed with no response. Every step forward felt like a leap into the unknown. Was she doing the right thing? Would her children one day resent her for fighting this battle? Or would they thank her for giving them the chance to know their father? These questions kept her awake at night, but they also fueled her resolve. Anika tried everything to reach him. She called the cruise line's customer service, only to be told with a curt reply, "Mr. Langston doesn't handle customer inquiries." She wrote a letter, a carefully crafted plea explaining her situation, but weeks passed without response. Her frustration mounted with every dead end. She scoured online articles, hoping for a clue, a way to bypass the fortress of wealth and power surrounding him. Then she found it. Robert was scheduled to attend an exclusive charity gala in Chicago, a rare public appearance. It was her one chance to confront him directly. Anika scraped together every penny she had, taking extra shifts at the diner to afford the flight and a borrowed gown. The risk was enormous, but she knew she couldn't give up. As she boarded the plane, clutching the folder of evidence she had painstakingly assembled, she whispered to herself, "This has to work." She couldn't stop now, not when so much was at stake. Over the next few days, Anika tried everything. She sent emails, left voicemails, and even showed up at events where she thought Robert might be present. Each time she was met with polite but firm refusals. It was as if an invisible wall had been erected around him, keeping people like her out. The stress began to take its toll. Anika's pregnancy made everything harder. She was constantly exhausted, her feet swollen, and her emotions running high. But every time she thought about giving up, she reminded herself why she was doing this. One afternoon, as she sat in her tiny hotel room, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a generic Langston Enterprises address. "Your correspondence has been received. Mr. Langston's legal team will review your claims and respond accordingly. Please refrain from attempting further contact. Any additional attempts will be considered harassment and dealt with accordingly." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Harassment? She wasn't trying to cause trouble. She just wanted to talk. Tears streamed down her face as she realized how powerless she was against the machine of wealth and power that protected Robert Langston. But Anika wasn't the type to back down. If anything, the email only fueled her resolve. She reached out to journalists who had written about Robert in the past, hoping they might have information that could help. Most of them brushed her off, but one, a young reporter named Claire, was intrigued by her story. "You're telling me you're carrying Robert Langston's triplets?" Claire asked skeptically during their meeting at a small coffee shop. "Yes," Anika said, her voice firm, "and I can prove it." Claire leaned back in her chair, considering. "If what you're saying is true, this could be a huge story, but going public like this, it's risky. Are you sure you want to do this?" Anika hesitated. She didn't want to expose her personal life to the world, but what choice did she have? "I don't want to ruin his reputation or start a scandal. I just want him to acknowledge his children." Claire nodded. "Okay, let me see what I can do." A few days later, Anika received a call from one of Robert's lawyers. The man's voice was cold and professional. "Ms. Thomas, we're aware of your claims, and we're prepared to take legal action if necessary. Mr. Langston's personal affairs are private, and we will not tolerate any attempts to defame him." "I'm not trying to defame him," Anika said, her frustration boiling over. "I just want him to take responsibility. I have proof, DNA tests if he's willing." The lawyer's tone softened slightly. "We'll review your evidence. If there's any validity to your claims, you'll hear from us." The call ended abruptly, leaving Anika with a mix of hope and fear. Anika stepped into the dazzling grand ballroom, her heart hammering in her chest as her eyes searched for him. The chandeliers sparkled like frozen rain, and the hum of conversation and laughter filled the air. She spotted him near the stage, impeccably dressed, his laugh smooth and effortless. For a moment, her confidence faltered. What was she doing here? But then, she thought of the tiny lives growing inside her and pushed forward. "Robert," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. He turned, his polished smile faltering as he recognized her. "Anika?" he murmured, his tone laced with confusion and something else she couldn't place. She straightened her back. "We need to talk. It's about that night on the cruise?" His expression hardened almost immediately, his guard snapping into place. "This isn't the time or place for this," he said under his breath, scanning the room for wandering eyes. "It's never the time or place, is it?" she shot back, her voice rising just enough to turn heads. "I've tried reaching out for months, letters, emails, even your office, but you ignored me, so here I am." Robert's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking to the small crowd that was beginning to notice the scene. "This is private." "Not anymore," Anika interrupted, pulling the folder from her bag. "I have proof, Robert. Ultrasounds, timelines, everything. You can't walk away from this." The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like a man caught between two worlds, the polished billionaire and the man who had danced with her under the stars. Then, with a curt nod, he said, "Follow me." The door to the lounge closed with a soft click, and Robert turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Start talking," he said, crossing his arms. Anika placed the folder on the table, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "I'm pregnant, Robert. Triplets, and they're yours." He stared at her, his jaw tightening. "You're sure?" His tone was clipped, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something deeper, fear, doubt, or maybe regret. "Yes, I'm sure," she said firmly. "I didn't come here to ruin your life or demand money, but I have 3 lives growing inside me, and they deserve to know their father. Whether you want to be part of their lives or not is up to you, but I won't let them grow up wondering where they come from." Robert let out a low breath, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Do you have any idea what you're asking? My life, it's not simple. Bringing children into it. It's not just about money or responsibility. It's about exposing them to this world. this mess. Your world? She countered, stepping closer. Do you think I care about your yachts or your billions? I don't. What I care about is that these children grow up knowing they're loved. And if you're too afraid to step up, then I'll do it alone. But don't you dare dismiss this as some inconvenience to your perfect little empire. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment Robert said nothing. Then finally he sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. I'll have a DNA test done. If they're mine, I'll do what's right. Anika shook her head, her voice sharp. Number, you don't get to figure it out or make this a business transaction. These are your children, Robert. Either you're in or you're not. I'm not asking for easy, Anika replied. I'm asking for what's right. As she left the lounge that night, her heart felt heavier than ever. She had finally confronted him, but the battle was far from over. The man she had once seen as a charming stranger was now a complicated, guarded figure standing at the crossroads of her future. But as she placed a hand on her growing belly, Anika reminded herself why she was doing this. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her children, and no matter what came next, she wouldn't give up. As Robert stared at the ultrasound images, his expression softened, just slightly. But Anika caught it. He looked up, his guarded demeanor breaking for just a moment. Triplets, he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. This changes everything. It doesn't have to, Anika replied, her voice firm. I'm not asking for your empire. I'm asking for you to be their father. Robert leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. This isn't just about me anymore, he said finally. This is about them. And you. If I step into this, there's no turning back. Are you ready for that? Anika met his gaze, unflinching. I've been ready since the moment I found out. The question is, are you? For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of their shared future pressing down on both of them. Then Robert sighed and stood. You'll hear from my legal team. We'll start with the DNA test. Anika rose, clutching her folder tightly. And after that? Robert hesitated, his hand resting on the door handle. After that, we'll see. He opened the door but stopped short of leaving, turning back to meet her eyes. This won't be easy, for any of us. It doesn't have to be easy, Anika said softly. It just has to be right. As the door closed behind him, Anika let out a shaky breath. She had taken the first step, but the path ahead was anything but clear. She placed a protective hand over her belly, whispering to her unborn children, "We're not done yet, not even close." If you were in Anika's shoes, would you have confronted Robert knowing the risks, or would you have stayed silent to avoid the struggle? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you love stories like this, ones filled with twists, emotions, and impossible decisions, don't forget to subscribe for even more captivating tales. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.